All and welcome to Women in Football's latest webinar. We are all very grateful to our members for your support. The feedback we are continuing to receive from you regarding our webinars is positive and encouraging. We're glad you're enjoying the series. We set the webinars up in response to the COVID-19 crisis, and we hope that you continue to find these inspiring and informative as we enter another uncertain period. We'll be carrying on with our series for the foreseeable future, so do let us know via email on events@womeninfootball.co.uk if you'd like to see a webinar on any topic in particular. We're delighted to confirm today that our event is in collaboration with FAIR and is part of the Black Lives Matter in Football campaign. Thank you to Jess, Leon, Francis, Hayley and Cheska for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here for what will be an informative and engaging conversation about unconscious bias. Thank you to FAIR, who is supporting this webinar in response to Black Lives Matter. Just a word on Cheska, she's just running a little bit late, so she will join us a little bit later. I'd like to introduce you to our panel and our host this morning. First up is Jessica Crichton, who is an award-winning broadcaster and journalist who has worked in the industry for more than 10 years for world-renowned organisations like BBC Sport, BT Sport, TalkSport, and more recently Sky Sports, where she presents the Women's Football Show. During her career, she's broadcast live from 4 Olympic Games and a Commonwealth Games. Sport has always been a big part of Jessica's life, having played football all her life, including for Charlton Athletic Women. Jessica also has a passion for inclusion and ensuring equal opportunities for all. She co-founded Rainbow Noir, a community space for LGBTQ people of colour in Manchester, and also plays an active role in the Black Collective of Media in Sport, Beacons, which seeks to amplify the voices of Black media professionals in sport. Her new YouTube chat show, B is for Black, provides a platform for Black women to vent, laugh, support and celebrate each other. Very warm welcome to you, Jess. Leon Mann is the founder of the Black Collective of Media and Sport, Beacons. He set up Beacons to address the underrepresentation of Black people in the industry and football's blacklist. The focus of the blacklist is to shine light on the achievements of the community in football, but away from the pitch. Leon began his career with the Footballers' Equality and Inclusion campaign, Kick It Out. Kick It Out is at the heart of the fight against discrimination for everyone who plays, watches or works in football. Leon moved to the BBC as a broadcaster and sports journalist at BBC Sport for 5 years along with ITV Sport and also across independent TV and online projects. Leon then went on to work as a freelance sports reporter and filmmaker and owns a successful production company, Refresh Film. He's a leading sports consultant and filmmaker who is passionate about sport and equality. In 2018, Leon received an award from the British Prime Minister for his work on equality in the sports media. A very warm welcome to you, Leon. Francis Kushak is a legal officer at Prospect Union, a UK trade union with over 150,000 members in the private and public sectors. They are the largest union in the UK, representing professional engineers, and have worked alongside women in football for many years, offering expert employment advice to our members. Francis specialises in unconscious bias training and advising companies on best practices in recruitment to alleviate bias. Very warm welcome to you, Francis. Hayley Bennett is a multi-award winning diversity and inclusion consultant and equality campaigner and specialises in delivering workshops on race, allyship and inclusive leadership. Working at Business in the Community as Senior Diversity Advisor and at Pinsent Masons as Diversity and Inclusion Consultant, she has also worked at Kick It Out, where her work involved educating stakeholders in the game on diversity and inclusion and educating stakeholders. Hayley studied politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. She's also co-founder of Nutmegs, a football community for women and non-binary people of colour, dedicated to creating new inclusive places to connect and enjoy the beautiful game. Hayley is currently a diversity and inclusion consultant at HTVB Consulting Limited. In its first year, she has successfully collaborated with Chelsea Football Club and spoke at the Global Ethnic Minority in Football Roundtable at the 2019 FIFA Women's World Cup in France. A very warm welcome to you, Hayley. I'm also glad to say that Francesca has now joined us. Welcome, Cheska. Hi, Fran.
Sorry, I had you on mute. Hello.
That's okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll just go through your bio quickly. Francesca is the Managing Director and CEO of Goals for Girls, which was launched in June 2013. Goals for Girls is a football development programme which works with young women aged between 11 and 16. The programme aims to break down barriers and reduce inactivity amongst young women in sport by raising the aspirations, self-confidence, self-esteem and mindsets of young women and preparing them to set and achieve their goals. The Football Development Programme provides football coaching, player development pathways, coaching, qualifications, workshops, inspirational seminars, trips and mentoring for girls in and around East London, and works with a diverse selection of young women from all cultures, backgrounds and abilities. G4G aims to encourage every individual to challenge themselves in a safe environment. A very welcome to you, Fran. I'm now going to hand you over to Jess to chair the panel for us.
Lovely, thank you so much, Lungi. A big warm welcome to all of the panelists. Lovely to have you with us. Can't wait to pick your brains. And thank you to everyone watching, listening. I've already seen that we've got someone all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. That is incredible reach. Big welcome to everyone watching. Just before we get started, just a few ground rules to take you through. The chat facility is open for you to use, so feel free to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you work, where you're from in the world as well. I love hearing about people might be in a different country to us. But as always, please do keep it positive, respectful, and polite as you would face to face. And I'd like to make it interactive as well. So if you do have a question, just fling it over into the chat facility and I'll try to get to them towards the end. Now to the panelists, my goodness, it's been such a rough few months, hasn't it? With COVID, the pandemic, the restrictions, and it's, you know, it's not over yet by a long shot. So I'm just interested to know from all of you how your jobs have been affected. I'll start with you, Hayley. Being now that everyone is seemingly talking about race and equality, and two, being Black History Month, you must be pretty booked and busy as a diversity and inclusion officer. But I mean, how was your job impacted by all the restrictions and everything moving online, as it were?
Yeah, it's been a lot. It's been really, really busy. I'm lucky. I feel lucky that I've got a job. I mean, let's put that out there, and that I'm busy, and that, you know, money's coming in, I'm paying the bills. But I think I'm in quite a weird position because this is something that I've always done, something I've always wanted to do. And I wanted people to start caring about race equality. But then I kind of feel like I've got my wish now. Suddenly everybody wants to do this work and I'm in demand, and just trying to make sure that I'm, you know, taking care of myself. I'm prioritising work that's going to make the most impact. And being able to navigate this online is quite tricky. So having like a lot of conversations with leaders online, you don't always gauge how well they're responding. Trying to make training really interactive online and creating safe spaces online as well to talk about race issues, especially for Black people, people of colour. In their homes, they have felt more, I guess, comfortable to speak out. But making sure that that is received well within the companies that I'm working with as well. It's been a roller coaster, mainly positives, but yeah, super emotionally draining as well.
Yeah, it is tough work. I definitely hear that. Fran, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, with the COVID-19 restrictions, I bet so many of the girls and young women that you work with were missing football so much. I know I was. So how hard was it to kind of keep up with them, support them online rather than face to face?
Yeah, adapting our whole strategy and moving it online was a roller coaster, but we managed to engage so many of our young people through our virtual like Zooms, and we managed to bring the program online and actually cater it to their needs. So we delivered online fitness sessions, we delivered football ball mastery sessions, we had inspirational women like we always do who come onto the program actually deliver sessions virtually where the girls could get involved. So we had a lot across the board where they weren't exactly like missing out on any of the program, mainly the trips and the qualifications, because everything like that came to a halt. But in regards to the delivery itself, it was on the forefront of the organization, going pretty well. But in the background, it was really challenging for us as members of staff, because obviously we're going for our own ups and downs, turbulences at home. So people have adjusting to working from home, making sure that the young people's mental needs were in a good state, making sure as well that the fact that because you're over the phone speaking to young people who may be finding that period of time mentally challenging, you can come off the phone thinking that maybe you haven't done enough to support them. So making sure that we had the right strategies and therapeutic approaches in place to support not only the young people, but their families, their siblings, their everything which surrounds them at home. And so that has been something which now we've took into consideration a lot. And out of this whole, with the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter, and which always matters, but the Black Lives Matter movement at that time, we made sure that we catered to the girls' needs, and one of them being, one of the conversations which kept coming up was around identity. The girls felt lost in that period of time with where they fitted in society. The news and everything was kind of focused on everybody else except for young people. So we had to make sure that we created units and workshops which responded to those needs for them young people, and allowed them to feel that they were still safe at home, and they were still fully supported.
Wow, important work, and a big transition then that you've had to make. I've been enjoying your content on Instagram. I know you've had a few IG lives with like Eniola Aluko and Michelle Moore, which are really, really good.
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
really good.
definitely. And now we're back in schools. It is again another transition because everybody's timetables in every school are completely different. So we're now having to make sure that we're not losing young people, and that we're working with more young people, because one of the big things through a round table we did with the girls is it's their mental health now they're struggling with. And I think that gets overlooked a lot with young people in regards to how are they coping with this transition, going back into schools, being in bubbles where their friends are not necessarily in these bubbles with them. So they're going all week without seeing people they normally would see and speak to.
Wow, such important work. Francis, good afternoon to you. As a legal officer at Prospect, how has COVID impacted on your work?
Oh, well, it's just become even more intense. I think probably work is one of the areas that has been most impacted by the pandemic, and unfortunately not in the most positive way. I think there have been some benefits in terms of perhaps some organisations have realised the benefits of home working, but equally I think we have to recognise that that doesn't work for everybody. Unfortunately, there's lots of people's jobs that are potentially vulnerable. So I think the furlough scheme helped with that, but wasn't the solution for everything. There were lots of people that slipped through the net really with that. And perhaps with the finishing of the furlough scheme, and although there being the new scheme in place, that again won't be a solution for everybody. In the months to come, I think for many people, it's going to be quite difficult. And I think certainly in the context of this discussion today, for us, it's important to ensure that employers are still applying fair processes, not discriminating against people when they're making the decisions in respect of perhaps, unfortunately, redundancies, but making sure that processes and procedures are applied fairly, and that there's still that level of scrutiny there in place. But there have been some positives, as I said. I think perhaps we've become more comfortable with home working and found best practice, learnt from people that have been home working for a long period of time. But there's also been quite a lot of difficult discussions that have had to take place as well. So really, we're just trying to support our members through this as best as possible.
Yeah, so you mentioned recruitment processes. I'm definitely going to come back to you on that. But I'm noticing a theme so far from our panelists, and that is adaptation, having to adapt to uncertain, unpredictable times, as I'm sure a lot of the guests watching and listening in will definitely relate to. Now, Leon, I know you've got your fingers in a lot of pies, but you are a sports consultant. So what exactly were you consulting on if sport wasn't happening, Leon?
That's a really good question that I didn't think was coming my way. But it's been an incredibly busy period. COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter has made things incredibly challenging for so many people, so many Black people, in terms of lots of people leaning on Black people for advice. What should we do? How should we change things? We want to change things tomorrow. And actually my experience is like 10, 20 years of conversations are culminating now into everyone wants to solve this within half an hour. And it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of funding, it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of accountability, it takes timelines. And a lot of people kind of get a bit scared when it gets to that stuff, but actually that's what you need to do. And that's what the work that's going to have to take place to really fix things going forward, genuinely fix things, not put a plaster over it. We're seeing a lot of plasters during Black History Month. We do see that often. We're seeing it a lot more so now, but actually, without being too cynical, actually, I do think there's a positive within all of this. I think this is the time to really push on and make a difference. I think we can absolutely change things from this point of view, and we can move things forward. So
you're hopeful then?
I am hopeful. Yeah, I am hopeful, and I have to be. And the conversations that I'm having are leading me to be hopeful. However, probably the test is this time next year, what does this conversation look like in terms of these questions that you're asking me, in terms of the progress that's been made, the changes that have taken place? You know, that's what we can really value, you know, people's commitment to change and our involvement in that. What's changed since those protests to now? You know, I think we've got a lot to reflect on, a lot of opportunities to move things forward. And I think COVID-19 actually has got people obviously acting in a different way. The fact that we're all sat on Zoom back-to-back Zoom meetings, 9 till 5 is one of them. And that is mentally grueling, because when would you normally go from big meeting to big meeting to big meeting without any travel time, any respite at all? So we're all having to adapt, as you say. But I am optimistic in terms of where we can go. But of course, let's see what the next year, 2 years, 5 years looks like. Let's
see. I'm glad you're hopeful. Let's get into unconscious bias, as this webinar is titled. And it's become a bit of a buzzword, particularly in the last few months with everything that's been happening with Black Lives Matter. It was actually, I did some research. It was a term brought to prominence by a group of social psychologists from the US around about 1998, apparently, according to the internet, and that never lies. And they wanted to understand the implicit negative beliefs and racial stereotypes that different people hold about certain societal groups. And now this can have an impact on all aspects of everyday life: healthcare, education, sport, recruitment, even trying to hail a cab. I've been in that situation. Hayley, how big of a problem do you think unconscious bias actually is? It's a buzzword now. Is it an issue?
Oh, you started with me, Jess. I think, to be honest,
tell it like it is, Hayley. Tell it like it is.
I'm sure the rest of the panel probably agrees with me on this, and even people listening. I think it is a buzzword. It is something that does exist. Like, we do have biases. How our brain is hardwired is to actually use associations which we've gathered throughout our life, and make quick jump judgments about other people based on these shortcuts that we do make. It is something that does exist. We all have it, and you can't get rid of it. But I think in terms of how it's used to respond to especially topics like Black Lives Matter and racial justice, race inequality, I think it's not the solution. And I think I've worked with so many companies who see it as a silver bullet. It's definitely one part of a really, really big puzzle. But I think for those of you who have joined today and those of you who have been on these kind of trainings or are requesting these kind of training, I want you to think about why it is that you're going to unconscious bias. What is it about the term unconscious bias that makes you feel safe, that makes you feel that it's going to work for you, that makes you feel that your leaders are going to buy into it? And I think when we talk about allyship and being anti-racist, which is now what everybody wants to be doing, actually key to that is accountability and self-accountability. So we can't be focusing on what we see as unconscious or unintentional. We need to be thinking about how bias pans out consciously, which is something that we probably all have as well. And how bias is built into society and systems. Systemic bias is also something that's very real. So it is a really big problem. And, you know, there's plenty of academic research and I've seen it pan out. But I think for those of you who are working in football, especially for those of you who've got ability to change structures within your organisations, whether that's hiring, how people progress throughout organisations, how people are measured on their performance. Like, you need to be thinking about the systemic biases that are built into your processes, as well as the biases that are built into our brains individually. You can't just look at one, you've got to look at your processes. So things like only going out to your mates when the job comes up, or only advertising in a certain place, that's a bias. And if you're really serious about tackling it, you need to look at your policies, your processes, as much as training your people.
Well, what a massive problem that is, as Hayley has just underlined for us. But I think it's one that we can overcome. Francis, how do companies ensure that you kind of alluded to this earlier, but how do they ensure that their practices and their processes aren't succumbing to unconscious bias? What can they do? There'll be a lot of people listening here and watching thinking, well, what can we do as an organization?
Yeah, so I think exactly what Hayley said, really. It's the first stage is to think about, well, what are the unconscious biases that we, particularly as managers, recruitment managers, employers, have, but just accepting that they exist isn't the solution and isn't where it ends. If you think about somebody's career, your own career, you go through the recruitment process, promotion processes, training opportunities, even just the allocation of work within a team. There's the potential for bias to creep in at each and every one of those stages, and that's just naming a few. And even if you had a little bit of bias applied against you at each one of those stages, over a whole career, you can see that that is going to put you at a huge disadvantage. So it's something that's really important, and it's something that employers need to identify at each and every stage where this bias could creep in, and look at where they can mitigate against it. So looking at recruitment, for example, the first stage, I think we need to be looking way before you're sifting through applications. Bias can creep in at a much earlier stage. Employers often say to me that we would like to recruit people from a whole range of different backgrounds, people that have had different experiences, people that have, can bring different ideas to the organisation, but we just don't get applications from such a wide pool. But I don't think that's enough to just stop there and say, look, we've tried. Have you considered, as Hayley rightly said, where you advertise? If you're advertising in the same places, then yeah, you probably are going to get applications from the same sorts of people. So have you thought about broadening where you advertise for roles, going out to a variety of different areas, different individuals, different organisations to try and recruit? Have you thought about the language that you use in those job applications? You could have two individuals that write the application for the same role and draw up a completely different advertisement. And often the language that can be used can either really encourage somebody to apply for a role or really put them off. And they could be that perfect candidate. So I think even, peer reviewing your applications before they go out, getting a view from lots of different people, really then you'll be able to see, well, what are the issues? What are the things I haven't thought about? Does this really appeal to a broad range of people? Again, similarly, the images used on websites, literature, even down to the annual reports that you write each year, is that inclusive imagery? Are you going to attract people from all different walks of life that want to work for your organisation? Because I think today, before applying for roles, people do their research. People will look at your websites, will look at the information that you're putting out about your business. And so is that image the image that you want to portray, the image that is most likely to attract people from a range of different experiences who can bring that new perspective and bring those ideas to your business? So I think, there's a whole host of things that people can do, but that's perhaps just some initial thoughts on that.
Brilliant. Hayley, Francis, I'm taking notes here. I'm going to take this back to all the different companies contacting me to solve their unconscious bias issues. Leon, now I'm sure you have seen your fair share of unconscious bias working in football and the media. Same industry I'm in. And I know I've seen it. So how do we mitigate against it? What's the answer in your eyes?
I mean, I think for me, it involves honesty. It involves self-evaluation, self-education, and understanding that this exists. I think for some people, it is just a buzzword. I think it's an alternative option. No one likes the R word, so we change it into something else. So I think this is about self-reflection, and I've kind of been through that process in the things that I'm doing. I kind of am referred to as an equality expert at times, but when I look at the initiatives I've set up, the football blacklist, BComs, we've gone on a journey where initially, and to some extent still now, if we're being completely honest, they are very male in terms of the work that we started doing, the people who came together, very straight, in terms of the work, very able-bodied. But at the time, we're all patting ourselves on the back going, gosh, yeah, look, we're making a difference. Isn't this great? And without realizing that we're actually keeping people outside of the room, or maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, or not creating a room where people feel it's an inclusive environment to come to be within. So that's something that I've reflected on over the years. We all make mistakes. We all do things wrong at times, and really, the strength of leadership is being able to go, I've got this wrong, I'm going to change it. So that's what Beacons has tried to do. Beacons is completely unfunded, so it's difficult to have structures, etc. as such. However, that can never be an excuse. So certainly in terms of the work that I've been involved in, and with the blacklist, certainly this year, we've introduced kind of new areas for our awards. Thank you to you, Jess, as part of the process with our LGBT plus award that we've introduced.
Brilliant. So happy about that.
No, it's a fantastic addition, and something that I wish we had done earlier. But again, you've got to be open to listening. My reaction to your request could have been leave off. I'm trying to do something positive here, right? And that is the response that we get, if we're being totally honest, from our industries. When you go and talk to people about the problems that they have, it's almost like, look, I'm doing my best, leave me alone. And that attitude is just completely wrong, and not an attitude that encourages an inclusiveness. We rarely talk about black disabled people. The football blacklist hasn't explicitly talked about black disabled people. So guess what? I've gone out and spoken to some black disabled people, and they've told me that they want to do things in a particular kind of way. So I'm on this learning journey, despite being someone who's labelled as someone who's an expert in this area. I'm going on a journey too. So if you're not in this area, then you have to understand that you are on a journey as well. So we have to kind of take all those things into account. So in terms of mitigating against it, I think it starts with honesty, and then it's just about kind of being professional, and this being part of business. I'm fed up with people talking about the things we're talking about now, almost like charity work. It's almost like someone's got a bucket and saying, look, go and put a bit of money in here. Once we've got enough, we'll start to do some work around it. Actually, that's totally unacceptable. These are business things we're talking about. This is how your business performs better, whether you're in the sports media, whether you're in any part of any industry. If you want to have top performance, if you want to be a top performer in your space, then you need to take diversity properly. And that is, about addressing unconscious bias. It is about creating inclusive environments. And if you don't do that, you're going to be left behind. And I think businesses will see that over the next few years, as the businesses that are taking this seriously will just push on ahead, and then people will be playing catch up in years to come.
I like that. Honesty, so important. And you know what as well? Just letting go of your ego sometimes. I found that when I am trying to challenge the structures that are in place and challenge the status quo, it's sometimes not even a case of whether they think I'm right or wrong. It's just a case of they don't want to listen because they don't want to listen. So big up Leon for that, because I think a lot of people can learn from what Beacons have done and the journey that Beacons have gone on in adding additions to the football blacklist, for example. Just one of the examples of the work that you're doing, Leon, and the companies that you're working with that are, I suppose, trying to diminish the effect of unconscious bias. So big up for that. Fran, I just want to bring you in because working with young women, they must have to experience this on a kind of day-to-day basis, this unconscious bias. So I wonder if you have any advice or any tips for those young women, particularly young Black women that will have it from multiple angles in terms of racial stereotyping, but also gender stereotyping as well.
Yeah, so we work with over 400 girls on our program weekly, and especially over, like we said, the Black Lives Matter movement and the pandemic itself, we realized that there was a lot which the girls were not being educated on. Think about it, our young people spend the majority of their times not in their households and in school. And the school system is seriously letting them down in regards to educating them on their identity, intersectionality, sexism, all those areas there, structural racism. They are not educating them on that. And you know why? Because they're doing it themselves. And young people don't even know that they're being discriminated against within the education system before they've even got to the employment system. And this is where, as an organization, Goals for Girls, we realize that we need to speak up and we need to make our voices heard in order to make the young people's voices heard. One of the examples I can give you is we are a sports development program, and we work with young women to develop their confidence and motivational skills by providing leadership and mentoring and workshops with the girls so they understand themselves. So when they go out into adolescence, they have a greater understanding of how to deal with situations which they may face daily, doors which may get closed on them. And one of these examples is one of the young people we work with, and if people follow us on social media, they see that we did a massive campaign around it, My Hair, My Identity. Like, from school, how are young people already being told that they are getting expelled because their hair is too big, and that they cannot sit in front of the classroom because it will block other people's views of the board? And when young people respond to this in an angry manner because they haven't been educated on basically approaching these situations on a professional manner, they are told that they cannot return to school, or they're excluded for 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 weeks or days, and now they're missing out on their education. And this is predominantly happening amongst Black girls in schools. So now they're missing out on their education because of this. So one thing I say, which is key, is that companies and organizations need to filter down to grassroots organizations who are doing things on the ground and are going into schools or youth or communities or youth centers and actually working face to face with these young people. Like I mentioned before, we have 400 young people. 80% of them are Black, Asian minority girls in low income areas throughout London. Organizations like myself and many other organizations are making immediate impact. So these are the organizations where larger organizations and who want to make an impact, we need to start as well with the next generation. We need to start asking these questions and presenting these issues to the next generation and educating them around how they can, when they get to an employability status, how they can ensure that they bring the best to the organizations as well they're working for, and how they avoid these situations they can present themselves in. And just as a prime example is one of the mentors who work with one of our girls who have come off our programs, because we have a post secondary education side of our program, who is mentoring one of them, said that her boss had turned around and said to her that if she stopped changing her hair all the time, she'd maybe retain all of her clients. So this is happening from the top all the way and filtering down to our youth. And I'm a big believer on saying that if she sees it, she believes it, and if she believes it, she breaks barriers. If we're not presenting people through our job advertisement, our media outlets, our sports industry, if we're not showing people who look like them, how do we expect them to break down the barriers they need to get to those jobs, to be in them positions, to create change? So I think that education is key, and not being scared of having these conversations within the workplace and within the school system.
Wow. Those incidences of Black girls being expelled is absolutely horrifying. Thank you for that, Fran. Hayley, so it's not just unconscious biases that we are dealing with, it's microaggressions as well. For anyone that doesn't know what a microaggression is, that's the, I suppose, indirect, innocuous comment that might express racism, homophobia, ableism, misogyny. One of my favorites is, can I touch your hair? One, no, because I don't know who you are. And two, my hair is not here for your entertainment and your intrigue. But Hayley, what's the answer in dealing with microaggressions? How big of an issue are they, particularly in the workplace?
They're really, really big, and I think they're confusing because we call them microaggressions, but they're not like small things. They don't have a small impact. And I think like one of the things to think about is that it's not that they're small. That's not why they're called micro. It's because it's happening on the micro level rather than like macro level. It's between individuals. So just like remember that as a key thing. But I think we need to own up to these microaggressions and learn about them. If you're someone that does that, like touches people's hair or makes comments about people's hair, you need to just be educated on these topics. There are so many articles about this now. There's, even if you just search racial microaggressions, there's like a really good handout on Google that just talks about all the different types of microaggressions that happen relating to race and why they're problematic. And I think it's really interesting because I was speaking to a few people that work in football that I know, and like around what microaggressions come up. And it was interesting because like the white women were being like, yeah, being mistaken for wives and girlfriends, and the black women were like being mistaken for cleaners working in the hospitality. Now, I think that says a lot, but I think what's really important with those statements is actually, first of all, why is it that we associate both of those type of women with those roles? And second of all, why does that mean that you could talk to people who are in those positions in a disrespectful way? Rather than just, you know, saying I'm offended because I've been called something that's not my job. But I think the other sort of microaggressions that exist are around being dismissive about issues to do with colour. So I think especially for a lot of white women who are probably listening to this, I think conflating sexism and racism is really dangerous. And even it happens quite a lot within like the LGBT plus movement in football as well, conflating homophobia and racism. I think a lot of the time it's like, it really bothers me because it alienates people who are across those intersections. So being like, if this was racism, it would have been taken more seriously. That is a microaggression.
So often.
I know, and it's not called out. So I think first of all, like taking action is calling this out. Like, don't leave it to people who are most affected by these microaggressions to do that. I think even things like, I don't see colour, or it should be the best person for the job, that always comes up when we're talking about like black coaches, for example. These are microaggressions, and I think there's a really good analogy which says that microaggressions are like mosquito bites. Like you can deal with one or two, but imagine if you had them cover like your whole body, you had hundreds of them. Your life would just completely be unbearable, and that happens. So I think like as white people, as allies, you need to educate yourself around what they are. And you need to call other people out, because it's so tiring, like as people of colour, especially as black people, calling microaggressions out. Like even at the moment, I've got somebody I'm chatting to who's going back and forth with me over what email they can write to call somebody out on something that was said. And it's literally taken them days and weeks to like craft this perfectly so they don't get called aggressive, so they don't like end up being a problem. Whereas if somebody who was witnessing it just spoke out and was like, that doesn't sound right, on that person's behalf, all that emotional labour would have been taken out of it. So stepping up, calling things out, and just educating around what these things are. You shouldn't have to talk to black women. You should be able to just use Google to find out what these things are.
This is true. We are living in the age of information, information at our fingertips on the internet. Guys, I'm just wary that if you do have questions, please put them in the chat facility so we can ask them to the panelists. I will try to get them into the next few minutes. But Leon, I just want to come to you and say, I wonder what do you feel people can do in terms of, Hayley mentioned they're speaking up, but how can colleagues support those that might be suffering with dealing with microaggressions?
I think it's about, first of all, recognizing it, because I think that's a big issue. I think people don't recognize it. You know, even the other day I was speaking to a colleague of yours, Jess, in the context of an interview, and they were saying, do people say, you know, you speak quite well? I thought, yeah, actually, people do say that. And then actually, I'm kind of thinking, why do people say that? I don't say that to my white mates or white people that I work with. And actually, you know, it's quite deep. It's quite deep when you kind of break that down, right? Because actually, what are they actually saying? What are they actually not saying, but thinking? And actually, that's the thing that we kind of are battling all the time. And, you know, in the Black community, we talk often about the chat in terms of you're going to have to work twice as hard, etc., etc. And it's interesting that our response is, yeah, okay, well, let's work twice as hard. Not, oh, that's out of order. You know, what's going on here? We shouldn't have to work twice as hard. We should be absolutely average like everybody else and still do well in the workplace. But actually, our response is just so programmed now because we're so used to it that actually we just kind of crack on, get our head down and say, right, we're going to work twice as hard as everybody else because that's just what life is. So I think people recognizing that this is a real thing and this impacts people is the first stage of it. And then I think creating that environment and changing things, because, you know, one thing that we all hear, certainly within the Black community, is talk of us, another talking shop. You know, many of the things that I've been involved in, people have gone, oh yeah, but Leon, it's another talking shop. And actually, you know, I get frustrated because I'm like, no, this is part of a process and the process leads to this and leads to that. But when the process doesn't lead to those things, then it does become just a talking shop. So what is the actual change? So people, leaders, need to commit to what the actual change is going to be. They need to tell everybody. They need to share what the timelines are. They need to be accountable for that change. And they need to explain, I think, just simple things like breaking down, you know, why diversity is good for a business and why it is good for society generally in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of getting beyond things like COVID-19. Black excellence, you know, the excellence of women is going to be absolutely central to getting beyond this ridiculous, crazy situation we have right now. That is diversity working in action. But we don't talk about those things. We don't share those kind of evaluations of diversity. Instead, it kind of fits to where people start talking about this language of box ticking and tokenism. That's the microaggression. But you know, we found someone, and it's not. And honestly, Leon, it's not tokenism. They're actually good. Like, you know, what are you on about?
Of course, surprise in their voice when they say it, though.
Exactly, and people don't recognise that in themselves because we haven't got an inclusive environment for someone to go, yo, we need to just reflect on what you've just said. And to Hayley's point, it gets tiring and difficult, and often we opt out as Black people of saying, listen, we need to have a chat, because it emotionally is so draining. And by the way, we've got our jobs to do at the same time, and put, you know, so all these kind of things swirling around, you know, ultimately recognize the issue. Leaders, tell us how we're going to change it. And, you know, what is the change? Let's recognize the change. And if people aren't changing it, then they need to be removed.
So much in that, Leon. The emotional labor that is involved with dealing with some of this, you're right, is very, very intense. And I think sometimes what a lot of people don't realize is that we are being asked to recount trauma, relive traumatic events when we're challenging this stuff. And it's very, very difficult. We've got some questions coming in, actually. Let's get to them now. This one, how do you stop the emotional labor of people coming to you for advice? Any tips on how to protect your boundaries? Hayley, give us some nuggets of information. I need help with this because I'm trying to take on far, far, far too much and I'm tired.
Do you know what the thing that works the best? I don't know if you do this, Leon, is you start sharing what your rates are for educating people. I've got consultancy rates I'm happy to disclose with you. But if you're not in a position to do that, I think you really need to actually sit down and write down what your boundaries are. And, you know, those of you who are interested, like, please message me because I've got like just what I do on that. I'm happy to share. Because the other thing I would say, I think, especially in this context of football, is that everybody's boundaries are different and everyone's levels of resilience when talking about racism and recounting trauma are different. And we shouldn't expect just because one or two people might do it. Maybe people are comfortable being interviewed about this topic. Maybe people are comfortable to speak at events on this, that every Black person wants to do this. And also, if people are saying it's not an issue, don't assume then that it's not an issue for everyone. So just keep like individual boundaries in place. But honestly, I think what we need to stop doing is just stop educating people and spending time doing it for free. I think signposting people to experts is really, really important, or signposting them to Google, like going back to what I said earlier, because it's already hard. We're under even more scrutiny in our workplaces because of our hypervisibility of being Black in the first place. So you can't be caught slipping, spending more time doing this kind of work as well. I think we have to be tough with our boundaries.
Yeah, I reckon I could have been a millionaire if I'd have charged consultant rates at this point.
Start it, Jess, honestly. See what people have to say.
No, I've got a list. Do you know what I've actually done? I've compiled a list now. So for when anyone comes to me, I signpost them to people like yourself or Michelle Moore or Leon, because I don't think I'm qualified just because of the color of my skin. And there are people that are more than qualified, as your lovely selves are, to deal with this kind of thing. Because I'm trying to do a job as well. So we have another question, and that this is an interesting one. Thank you to Sarah Collins for this one. How do you challenge managers when you're aware they'll be upset by pointing things out, and it's going to change the dynamics of your working relationship going forward? This is something I'm always trying to kind of to weigh up throughout my career, challenging the status quo when there are people, as I mentioned, sometimes it's not whether it's wrong or right, it's sometimes ego gets involved and people just simply do not want to listen. Leon, what's your advice for that?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question, and actually it speaks to everybody who's on this Zoom call, because how do you approach someone who is senior about this? The best bit of advice, or one of the best bits of advice I've had in my career, is whenever you bring a problem, bring the solution, and if you can, make yourself central to delivering it, so you can kind of make sure it's done in the right way, if you can. So always, if you're going to bring any kind of issue like this to your manager, and I would take it to the most senior person. I wouldn't even go to your line manager necessarily. I'd take it to the most senior person you have access to, and I would bring some kind of solution.
Leon, I just want to challenge you on that, because oftentimes we are being asked to solve a problem that we never created in the first place. So I think it's one thing to be able to identify the problem and call it out, but should we be coming up with a solution? That's what the manager is there for, and that's why they're being paid double the money, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, if I'm in an environment where there's a problem, and it's an ongoing problem, then suddenly I lose the trust of my workplace. I lose the trust of them to deliver the solution, because I've been sat there experiencing it. And normally I've got an email saying, right, we've got a new diversity initiative, or whatever it is. That was my kind of former life. That's kind of what I experienced. Whereas a solution, we're not looking. Look, I mean, Mandela didn't solve racism, right? So let's face it, we've got a real challenge if we think about solving racism. However, the solution could be go and speak to Hayley. You need to go and speak to experts. And I think often that is the solution, because if anything goes wrong in a business, like if something goes wrong technology wise, you don't kind of ask your staff how we should fix the computer. You don't ask the staff about how you should sort the heating out, right? So actually, we need to recognize that this is an expertise, and you find your experts and you work with them, and actually we might start to see some results. But absolutely, I think we should encourage people to come forward and be open about talking about problems in the workplace, but have some kind of solution, because and that solution can be literally speak to somebody. You guys need to sort this out, because I'm experiencing this on the shop floor.
Go employ Hayley, everyone. She's good. We have another question come in. Now, this is an interesting one. Fran, I think you might be able to answer this particular question. How much do you feel that class and education plays into unconscious bias?
I think it's a key element, to be honest with you, is something which once we're kind of making it normal for young people to face this in schools and the education system, whether that's their class, where they live, whether it's a deprived community compared to a more prevalent community, or we talk about, for example, how they're being spoken to within the education system and dealt with in the education system, then you're creating a norm for people to, when they get into, for example, when they're employed, you're creating a norm that it's okay to deal with these certain factors. It's okay to speak to somebody who's maybe from the Black community that way. You're making it okay to kind of segregate people within the educational system. And I think that's why we need to start them conversations from a grassroots perspective. It's all well we going into the boardrooms and addressing this to our employers, but kids are like sponges. They soak things up and they take a lot of things on, and that's how we mold people into their environments, and whether we raise their aspirations, confidence, we mold them. So if we're saying to people in low-income communities from a Black community, well, this is what we expect of you, then more likely than not, this is what we're going to expect from them when they go into the workplace. They're going to go into the workplace thinking that these biases are okay. It's normal for them to live by these, because no one's has ever raised these conversations to them. So I think it's key, and I'll keep going back to educating young people and not being scared to really have them conversations with them on these biases they are going to face. Regardless of how much work we do, we're not going to change every organization. So they are at some point, and they are at this moment in time facing biases. And the more they're aware of it, the more that we're going to have little Haleys running around, being able to challenge and like Leon said, raise solutions and be people who can really go into organizations and create change and be the CEOs of organizations that create change. It's crazy to know that I had a young person who asked me the other day that, oh, you're the only Black woman I know who owns a football organization. That's really inspiring. I never knew you could do that. And that's your journey you've been on. Tell me more. And for me, that was like, whoa, okay, I didn't know we were still having this conversation. I thought that we had representation or even more representation out there. And funny enough, we haven't. So this conversation, like Leon said earlier, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in an hour. It's not going to happen in one conference, but it's something which we have to get down to the younger generation. And we have to, if you're an organization out there and you're an organization where you like to send people into schools, communities to educate yourselves and work with your CSR policies, work with local organizations to do better within communities and deprived communities, rather than you all sitting in a boardroom and thinking you know the solution, please just come and talk to the kids and ask them what it is they face in their local communities, what are the biases they're facing now, because maybe we'll be able to resolve a lot more situations before we get to the problems within work environments by speaking to young people now rather than later. The other thing which I quickly want to say is I am probably really tired of organizations, especially large organizations, especially organizations in the sports industry, where they think that by just creating program after program after program is creating an actual solution. It's not creating a solution. By creating another program in an area and you're saying that you're targeting the Black, Asian, minority communities and you're starting a new program, that doesn't solve the issue of what is going on for young people. Why not do your research and look at organizations which are already out there? Organizations which are already doing the work, like Goals for Girls. We, as a female Black business owner, I probably receive, considering that we have one of the highest outcome rates with our intervention within the whole of the UK, we would probably receive the less funding. And we have the highest intervention rate. How does that make sense? That we're bringing girls out and educating them the way we are and retaining them, and all these conversations everyone's having with how do we get girls engaged? How do we teach them about, how do we make sure there's Black coaches? We need to look a lot more closer to home because there's organizations out there which are already doing it. We don't need all these other programs. You've got people like Haley who provide consultancy. You've got people out there who are doing it. We don't need to be creating program after program and investing money into things which are going to have a limited impact. It's all about impact. And if we want to have change, we need to really think about where we're investing, who we're talking to, and make sure that we're educating, not at the top, just at the top, but also at the bottom.
Thank you, Fran. And I like what you say there about action. We've had a lot of conversations, particularly over the last few months. What we need now is tangible action. What we need now is impact. And I know all of you in your respective roles are doing that in the wider world. A massive thank you to Leon, to Fran, to Hayley, and to Francis as well for joining me for such an insightful chat. I learned a lot, and I hope it was useful for the guests as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to host this for Women in Football. I'll hand over now to Lungi. Thanks, Lungi.
Thank you so much, Jess, for being such a brilliant host. That went by really, really quickly. I was really enjoying the conversation. I see the chat function has been really, really busy. So thank you all for being so engaged. Thank you, Leon, for your insight into the positive and progressive conversations you're having in the sport industry. I'm really glad to hear you're hopeful for change. I'm also really happy to hear that you're continuing on your learning journey, something that we should all be doing. Thank you, Francis, for sharing with us some of the challenges that people are still facing and for continuing to support WIF through Prospects. Also for providing an insight into how Prospects train and challenge employers to eliminate the prevalence and effects of unconscious bias. I hope more and more take this up. Thank you, Cheska, for your insight into how you're being innovative in engaging young girls at a time when they have had to question their identity and equipping them with the skills that they unfortunately need to navigate society as we currently know it. Here's hoping we're not still talking about this in a year or a decade from now on. I'm sure a lot share your frustrations into the solutions that are always being thought up. And thank you so much, Hayley, for highlighting the methods that we can all use to identify our biases and mitigate them against them in recruitment and such. Also for educating us all on microaggressions and for highlighting the need for other people to call these out and speak out against them. Thank you all for such an absorbing and informative conversation. Do let us know your thoughts on the webinar via Twitter or our email on events@womeninfootball.co.uk. We are going to continue to run more of these events over the next few weeks, so look out for an email invite in your inbox soon. And thank you again for joining us. See you next time.